Admiral Kane Morrison stood at the massive window of the space station, watching another Allied fleet get destroyed. The ships exploded in bright flashes of light against the black space. Each explosion meant thousands of good people were dead. He clenched his fists and tried not to think about the numbers. "Sir, that's the 4th Fleet this month," said Lieutenant Roy Baker, his young aide. The man's voice shook as he spoke. Everyone was scared now. The Zarathi Empire was winning and nobody knew how to stop them. Morrison turned away from the window. The Zarathi were different from any enemy humanity had ever faced. Their ships were not made of metal and circuits like normal warships. They were alive. Bioships, the scientists called them. Living creatures that could change and adapt to any weapon used against them. The first time humans fought them, laser cannons worked fine. The second battle, the bioships had grown thick armor that bounced the lasers away like toys. Missile attacks worked once. After that, the creatures grew tentacles that caught missiles and threw them back. Every weapon, every tactic, every strategy worked exactly one time. Then the Zarathi adapted and became stronger. "How many systems have they taken now?" Morrison asked, though he already knew the answer. 17, sir. And they're moving toward the core worlds. Intelligence says they'll reach Earth in 6 months. Morrison walked to his desk and sat down heavily. The weight of command felt heavier each day. He was responsible for defending humanity, but how do you fight an enemy that learns from every attack? The Galactic Council had tried everything. The Zephyrians brought their energy weapons. The Zarathi adapted. The Crystalline Federation used sonic attacks. The bioships grew new organs to handle sound. Even the ancient Voidwalkers came out of hiding with weapons nobody had seen before. It didn't matter. The Zarathi learned and grew stronger. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," Morrison called. Captain Lisa Brooks entered the room. She was small and thin with wild curly hair that never seemed to stay in place. Her uniform was always slightly wrinkled and she had a habit of juggling small objects when she talked. Right now she was tossing 3 metal balls in the air with one hand while holding a datapad with the other. "Admiral, I need to talk to you about Project Oddball," she said, catching all 3 balls and putting them in her pocket. Morrison sighed. Brooks was brilliant, but she had strange ideas. She used to work in a traveling circus before joining the military. Her engineering solutions were creative but often made no sense to normal people. "Captain, we don't have time for experimental projects. We need real weapons." "That's exactly what I'm offering, sir." Brooks sat down and leaned forward. "The problem with fighting the Zarathi is that we keep using logical weapons. Their bioships are designed to understand and adapt to logical threats. But what if we use something completely illogical? Explain." Brooks activated her datapad and showed him strange blueprints. The designs looked like nothing Morrison had ever seen. "I've been working with a team of engineers who used to work in entertainment. Circus performers, magicians, theme park designers. We've built something that makes no military sense at all." Morrison looked at the blueprints. The weapon systems included giant mechanical arms, spinning wheels covered in lights, and what appeared to be confetti cannons. "Captain, this looks like playground equipment." "Exactly." Brooks jumped up excitedly and started juggling again. "The Zarathi bioships try to understand what they're fighting so they can adapt. But how do you adapt to something that serves no logical purpose? How do you defend against an attack that makes no sense? This is ridiculous. We need real weapons, not toys." Brooks stopped juggling and looked serious. "Admiral, with respect, real weapons haven't worked. We've lost 17 systems using real weapons. Maybe it's time to try something unreal." Morrison stared at the blueprints. Part of him wanted to dismiss Brooks and her crazy ideas, but another part remembered all those exploding ships outside his window, all those good people who died because conventional weapons failed. "Do you have any proof this could work?" he asked. Brooks smiled and pulled a small device from her pocket. It looked like a tiny carousel with spinning horses. "We tested it on captured Zarathi biotissue. Watch this." She activated the device. The little horses started spinning while tiny lights flashed in random colors. Carnival music played from hidden speakers. The device seemed to serve no purpose except to be silly. Brooks placed a sample of Zarathi biotissue near the device. The tissue was supposed to be dead, but it still had some adaptive properties. As soon as the carousel started working, the tissue began to change. It grew eyes, then tentacles, then armor plating. But the changes kept switching back and forth. The tissue couldn't decide what it was adapting to because there was nothing logical to understand. After 30 seconds, the tissue stopped moving entirely. It had overloaded trying to adapt to something that made no sense. Morrison stared at the motionless biosample. It killed it? The adaptive systems crashed. They couldn't process input that had no logical pattern or purpose. Brooks put the device away. Admiral, I know this sounds crazy, but crazy might be exactly what we need. Morrison thought about the war reports on his desk. 17 systems lost. Earth threatened. Millions of people counting on him to find a solution. Every conventional approach had failed. Maybe unconventional was worth trying. How long would it take to build a full-scale version, he asked. We already have the basic framework done. Give me 6 weeks and a construction team, and I'll give you the strangest warship in galactic history. Morrison looked out the window again. Another patrol ship was limping back to base, trailing fire and debris. The Zarathi were coming, and conventional weapons were useless against them. Maybe it was time to try something completely different. Do it, he said finally. Build your impossible ship, Captain Brooks. But if this fails, we're all dead anyway. Brooks grinned and started juggling again. Don't worry, Admiral. We're going to give the Zarathi the greatest show they've ever seen, and it's going to be their last. Captain Danny White walked into the shipyard and stopped dead in his tracks. The thing floating in the construction bay looked nothing like a warship. It was painted in bright colors that shifted and changed as he watched. Purple turned to orange faded to green, and green sparkled into silver. The hull seemed to dance with moving patterns that hurt his eyes if he stared too long. Beautiful, isn't she? Captain Brooks appeared beside him, grinning widely. We call her the UES Jester. She's almost ready for her crew. Danny had been a street magician before joining the military. He had performed tricks with cards and coins on busy street corners, making people smile and forget their troubles for a few minutes. That was before the war started. Now Admiral Morrison wanted him to command this impossible ship because, as Morrison put it, you understand how to make people see things that aren't really there. It looks like a circus tent with engines, Danny said, still staring at the ship. That's the idea. Come on, let me show you around. Your crew is all ready. Here. They took a small shuttle to the ship's docking bay. Inside, the Jester was even stranger than outside. The walls curved in impossible ways, covered with mirrors and lights that created optical illusions. Danny felt dizzy just walking down the corridor. Nothing looked quite right. Doors seemed to be where walls should be, and walls bent at angles that made no sense. The whole ship is designed to confuse, Brooks explained as they walked. Anyone who boards her will feel lost and disoriented. Even our own crew needs time to get used to it. They entered what should have been the bridge. Instead, Danny found himself in a room that looked like the backstage area of a theater. Control panels were hidden inside what appeared to be prop boxes. The captain's chair was designed to look like a throne from a children's play, complete with fake jewels and golden paint. 4 people were waiting for them. Brooks introduced the crew that Admiral Morrison had carefully selected. Maria Santos stood near the pilot controls, which were built into what looked like a carnival game. She was small and muscular, with calloused hands and perfect balance. Former acrobat, Brooks said. She can fly anything and make it dance in the air. She's also the only pilot who didn't get sick during the test flights. Pete Johnson sat at the communication station, which was disguised as a joke shop counter complete with rubber chickens and fake flowers. He was tall and thin with an easy smile. Stand-up comedian before the war, Brooks continued. He knows how to talk to crowds and keep people confused with words. Perfect for handling enemy communications. Amy Clark worked at the weapons control station, which looked like the control booth for a theme park ride. She had paint stains on her fingers and wore thick glasses. She used to design roller coasters and fun houses. Now she designs ways to make enemy ships feel like they're on the worst ride of their lives. The last crew member made Danny smile despite everything. Tony Miller was a big man with a red nose and oversized shoes. His military uniform was modified to look slightly ridiculous, with 2 bright patches and buttons that didn't match. Clown college professor, Brooks said proudly. He taught the theory of comedy and confusion for 20 years. He's our tactical advisor. A clown is giving us military advice? Danny asked. Tony's voice was deep and serious, which seemed wrong, coming from someone dressed like a circus performer. Captain, making people laugh and making them confused use the same principles. Surprise, misdirection, timing. A good joke and a good battle plan both depend on the audience not seeing what's really happening until it's too late. Brooks activated a wall screen that showed the ship's weapon systems. Danny stared in amazement. Instead of normal guns and missiles, the Jester had mechanical arms that could juggle objects in space, holographic projectors that could create impossible shapes and patterns, and something called sonic confusion cannons that could play any sound from anywhere in the galaxy. How do we fight with juggling arms? Danny asked. Amy looked up from her station. The arms can juggle smart mines, sensor jammers, or reflective chaff. Enemy ships try to track the pattern and predict where the objects will go next. But there is no pattern. The arms are programmed with chaos algorithms, pure randomness. Maria spun her pilot chair, which was designed to look like a teacup ride seat. The ship can move the same way. No flight pattern, no predictable maneuvers. I can make her dance, spin, loop, and spiral in ways that make enemy targeting computers give up trying to lock on. Pete pressed a button on his station and filled the bridge with the sound of carnival music mixed with elephant trumpets and crowd laughter. I can broadcast anything we want. Confusing sounds, strange music, fake radio chatter. I can make the enemy think they're being attacked by 100 ships or make them believe we're having a birthday party in the middle of battle. Danny sat down in the captain's chair. It was surprisingly comfortable despite looking ridiculous. And what exactly is my job in all this chaos? Tony stepped forward, his big shoes squeaking on the floor. You're the ringmaster, Captain. Every good circus needs someone to direct the show. Your job is to make sure all the chaos works together, to tell a story, even if it's a story that makes no sense. Brooks activated the ship's AI system. A cheerful voice filled the bridge, speaking with the accent of an old carnival barker. Hello there, folks. I'm Bobo, your friendly ship computer. I'm programmed with every joke database, magic trick manual, and circus routine in human history. I can make this ship do things that will amaze and confuse even us. Danny looked around at his crew. A former acrobat, a comedian, a theme park designer, and a clown professor. They were supposed to save humanity with juggling arms and carnival music. It was the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard of. When do we start training? He asked. Brooks smiled. Right now. But remember, this isn't normal military training. You need to think like performers, not soldiers. Your enemy isn't just the Zarathi bioships. Your enemy is logic itself. You need to be so unpredictable, so chaotic, so absolutely random that adaptation becomes impossible. Danny stood up and looked at his strange crew in their impossible ship. Outside, the Zarathi Empire was conquering system after system with their adaptive bioships. Soon they would reach Earth. Humanity's last hope was a ship that looked like a circus tent and a crew of former entertainers. For the first time since the war began, Danny White started to smile. Maybe the galaxy needed a good show. The UES Jester dropped out of hyperspace near Proxima Station with a flash of rainbow colors. Captain Danny White gripped his ridiculous throne chair as the ship shook and spun. 3 weeks of training had taught him that normal space travel rules didn't apply to their vessel. The Jester moved through space like a drunk butterfly, and somehow that was exactly what they wanted. Contact on sensors, Pete Johnson called out from his joke shop communication station. 3 Zarathi bioships, scout class. They're about 2 kilometers away and closing fast. Danny felt his stomach twist with fear. This was their first real battle. All their training had been simulations and practice runs. Now they faced the enemy that had destroyed 17 star systems and countless allied fleets. Maria, take us toward them. Nice and slow, Danny ordered, trying to keep his voice steady. How slow is nice? Maria asked, her hands dancing over controls disguised as carnival game buttons. Make it look like we're not sure what we're doing. The jester moved forward in a wobbly line, drifting left and right like a ship with engine problems. On the main screen, Danny could see the 3 Zarathi bioships. They looked like giant sea creatures made of dark metal and living tissue. Tentacles waved from their hulls, and organic sensors swept back and forth like searching eyes. They're scanning us, Pete reported. I'm getting lots of confused chatter on their communication channels. They can't figure out what kind of ship we are. Tony Miller, still wearing his oversized clown shoes, waddled over to Danny's chair. Remember, Captain, we're not trying to win a normal fight. We're putting on a show. The stranger we act, the more confused they'll get. Amy, are the weapons ready? Danny asked. Amy Clark looked up from her theme park control booth. All systems ready, Captain. We've got confetti cannons loaded with reflective chaff, holographic projectors warmed up, and the juggling arms are ready to dance. Bobo, start playing some music, something cheerful. The ship's AI responded immediately. Cheerful circus music began playing from speakers throughout the jester. The sound was broadcast on all radio frequencies so the Zarathi ships could hear it too. Enemy ships are slowing down, Maria reported. I think they're confused by the music. The lead Zarathi bioship sent out a probe tendril, a long organic sensor that reached toward the jester like a snake. Danny knew this was how they usually started their attacks. The probe would scan the enemy ship, learn about its weapons and defenses, then report back so the bioship could adapt. Now, Amy, give them something to scan. Amy pressed a big red button that looked like it belonged on a children's toy. Instantly, the space around the jester filled with massive holographic images. Giant rubber ducks appeared and began floating through the vacuum of space. Spinning pinwheels the size of buildings rotated slowly between the ships. A holographic carousel materialized and began turning, complete with horses that went up and down. The Zarathi probe tendril touched one of the rubber ducks and immediately recoiled. The bioship began changing, growing what looked like defensive plates designed to protect against rubber ducks. Its organic systems were trying to adapt to a threat that didn't exist. Pete, start the confusion protocol, Danny ordered. Pete's fingers flew over his controls. Broadcasting now, Captain. The music changed to a mix of different sounds. Elephant trumpets played alongside violin music. Children laughing mixed with the sound of ocean waves. Carnival barkers called out in languages that didn't exist. The audio chaos was designed to overload any system trying to make sense of it. The bioships are having trouble, Maria reported with excitement. Their movement patterns are getting erratic. I think their navigation systems are confused by all the noise. Time for the main event, Danny said. Amy, release the jugglers. The jester's mechanical arms extended from hidden ports along the hull. Each arm was the size of a building and painted in bright colors. They began juggling objects in the space between the ships. Spinning balls, fake flowers, and what appeared to be rubber chickens flew through complex patterns around the Zarathi vessels. But these weren't just toys. Hidden inside each juggled object were smart mines, sensor jammers, and electromagnetic pulse devices. The Zarathi bioships tried to track the juggling pattern, their organic computers working frantically to predict where each object would go next. They can't do it, Tony said, laughing despite the danger. Their adaptation systems are designed for logical threats, but juggling follows artistic patterns, not mathematical ones. There's rhythm and beauty, but no predictable logic. The first Zarathi bioship began to shake violently. Its hull rippled with changes as it tried to adapt to the juggling pattern. Armor plates grew and disappeared. Weapon systems emerged and retracted. The ship was adapting so fast to so many different perceived threats that its biological systems couldn't keep up. Maria, time to dance, Danny called out. Maria grinned and grabbed her controls. The jester began moving in ways that no warship should. It spun like a figure skater, looped like a roller coaster, and spiraled like a falling leaf. The ship painted impossible patterns in space, creating a three-dimensional artwork using rocket exhaust and engine fire. The Zarathi ships tried to follow and target the jester, but Maria's flight pattern made no tactical sense. She was flying, like she was performing for an audience, not fighting a battle. Every move was beautiful and graceful, but completely unpredictable. Second enemy ship is losing cohesion, Amy reported. Its adaptation systems are overloading. The second Zarathi bioship began falling apart. Its living hull couldn't handle the constant changes its systems were trying to make. Organic components separated and drifted away into space. The third bioship tried a different approach. It stopped trying to adapt and instead charged straight at the Jester with all weapons firing. "Emergency maneuver!" Danny shouted. But Maria was already moving. The Jester dove under the attack, spinning as it went. The mechanical juggling arms caught the enemy's energy blasts and juggled them like glowing balls before throwing them back. The reflected weapon struck the attacking bioship and caused massive damage. "That's impossible," Pete said in amazement. "She just juggled laser beams." "Nothing's impossible in a good show," Tony replied, his big red nose honking with excitement. Within minutes, all three Zarathi scout ships were either destroyed or drifting helplessly in space. Their adaptation systems had been completely overwhelmed by inputs they couldn't understand or categorize. Danny sat back in his throne chair, hardly believing what had just happened. They had won their first battle, not with superior weapons or tactics, but with juggling, holographic rubber ducks, and circus music. "Captain," Pete said, his voice full of wonder, "we just defeated the Zarathi using carnival tricks." "No," Danny corrected him, looking at his crew of former entertainers. "We just proved that sometimes the best way to fight is to put on a show so good that your audience forgets they're supposed to be fighting back." The Jester turned toward home, its hull shifting through rainbow colors as circus music played softly. In the background, humanity had found its secret weapon, and it was the strangest thing the galaxy had ever seen. The news of the Jester's victory spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communications. Every species in the Galactic Council wanted to know how humanity had defeated Zarathi bioships using circus equipment. But the victory also reached the Zarathi Empire, and War Prime Zexthol was not pleased. Captain Danny White stood in Admiral Morrison's office, looking at the massive holographic display showing enemy fleet movements. Red dots marked Zarathi positions, and there were far too many of them heading toward Earth. "They're bringing everything they have," Morrison said grimly. 200 bioships, including their largest war forms. Intelligence says Zexthol himself is leading the fleet in a creature the size of a small moon. Danny felt sweat on his forehead. The Jester had defeated 3 scout ships, but this was different. "Have they adapted to our methods?" "That's the problem. We don't know. Our spies report that the Zarathi have been experimenting with new bioforms designed specifically to handle chaotic input. They've been studying Earth's entertainment broadcasts, trying to understand what we did." Brooks entered the office carrying a data pad and juggling 3 stress balls. "I have good news and bad news," she announced. "The bad news is that our one ship can't fight 200 enemies, no matter how confused we make them." "And the good news?" Morrison asked. Brooks grinned. "The good news is that we're not using just one ship. We're staging the biggest show in galactic history." She activated her data pad, and the holographic display changed. Instead of showing fleet positions, it now showed what looked like a carnival, layout scattered across the solar system. "I've been working with Earth's entertainment industry," Brooks continued. "Every circus, theme park, movie studio, and performance company in human space has volunteered to help. We're not just fighting a battle, we're putting on a show." Danny stared at the display. Converted cruise ships hung in space near Jupiter, their hulls covered with lights and holographic projectors. Old satellites had been turned into spinning disco balls the size of buildings. Volunteer pilots and small ships designed to look like flying animals were scattered throughout the system. "This is insane," Morrison said, but he was smiling. "Sir, insane is what we do best," Danny replied. "But War Prime Zexthol is smart. He'll expect us to use the same tricks that worked before. We need to give him something completely new." "Tony." Miller waddled into the office, his clown shoes squeaking on the floor. Behind him came Maria, Pete, and Amy. The whole crew of the Jester had been summoned for the planning session. "Captain," Tony said in his serious voice that sounded wrong coming from someone with a red nose, "I've been thinking about narrative, structure. Our first battle was like a short joke. Quick setup, confusion, punchline, but this needs to be a full story. Explain, Morrison said. Amy stepped forward, her theme park designer mind working. Every good story has acts: setup, conflict, resolution. What if we designed the battle like a 3-act play? The Zarathi fleet arrives expecting chaos, but instead they get a story they have to follow from beginning to end. Pete nodded excitedly. I can coordinate the audio across the entire solar system. Instead of random noise, we broadcast a narrative, soundtrack, music that tells a story, dialogue that moves the plot forward. Force them to try to adapt to a story instead of just random chaos. Maria bounced in her chair like an excited acrobat. And I can choreograph the ship movements. Not just random dancing, but actual performance art. Every ship in our volunteer fleet moving together to create shapes and patterns that advance the story. Danny felt a strange excitement building in his chest. This was bigger than just confusing. The enemy. They were talking about turning war into art. What story do we tell? Morrison asked. Brooks stopped juggling and looked serious. The story of first contact. The story of 2 different species meeting for the first time. We show them what humanity is really about. 3 weeks later, the Zarathi fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system. War Prime Zexthul's flagship was indeed the size of a small moon, covered in organic weapons and adaptive armor. The creature's biosensors swept across the system, expecting to find the usual human defenses. Instead, they found what appeared to be a carnival. The converted cruise ships were playing music and projecting holographic fireworks. The disco ball satellites spun slowly, sending patterns of light dancing across space. Small ships that looked like flying butterflies and birds moved in formation, creating living artwork against the stars. What is this? Zexthul demanded from his command throne deep inside the bioship's living hull. His tactical officer, a smaller Zarathi with multiple eye stalks, studied the sensor readings. War Prime, they appear to be celebrating our arrival. The jester appeared from behind Earth's moon, its rainbow hull shifting colors and welcome patterns. Captain Danny White's voice broadcast across all frequencies, speaking in perfect Zarathi. Greetings, travelers from distant stars. Welcome to our solar system. We invite you to witness the greatest story ever told. Zexthul's bioship had been specifically evolved to handle chaotic input, but this wasn't chaos. This was organized, structured, purposeful. The ship's adaptation systems prepared for random attacks that didn't come. Instead, the human fleet began to move in synchronized patterns. Ships formed shapes in space that told a visual story. The lights and music weren't random noise, but a carefully composed symphony. Even the holographic projections worked together to create scenes that showed the history of first contact between species throughout the galaxy. Act 1. Danny's voice announced as the human ships formed the shape of 2 hands reaching toward each other. In the beginning, we were alone. The Zarathi bioships tried to advance but found themselves caught up in the performance. The human formation changed, showing the loneliness of single species scattered across the galaxy. The music was sad and beautiful, making even the Zarathi pause. Act 2. Danny continued as the formation shifted again. Then we found each other. The human ships began interacting with the Zarathi fleet, not attacking but dancing around them. The bioships found their targeting systems confused not by chaos but by beauty. How do you adapt to defend against art? War Prime Zexthul realized what was happening. They're not fighting us. They're trying to tell us a story. Should we attack? War Prime? His tactical officer asked. Zexthul hesitated. His bioship was designed to adapt to threats, but how do you threaten a story? The human performance was affecting his crew. Zarathi, who had never experienced narrative art, were watching, in fascination as the tale unfolded in space around them. Act 3, Danny announced as the jester moved to the center of both fleets. We choose what happens next. The human ship stopped moving. The music quieted to a whisper. In the silence of space, 2 fleets faced each other, waiting to see how the story would end. Danny's voice came one more time, soft and filled with hope. War Prime Zexthul, You have a choice. You can end this story with violence and death the way every First Contact story has ended before, or you can help us write a different ending. The choice is yours. For the first time in Zarathi history, a war fleet stopped not because they were defeated, but because they were curious to see how the story would end. War Prime Zexthul sat in silence inside his massive bioship, staring at the human fleet that surrounded him like performers on a stage. His tactical officers waited for orders that didn't come. For the first time in his long military career, he didn't know what to do. The humans had done something impossible. They had turned war into art, conflict into story. His bioships were designed to adapt to any weapon, any strategy, any form of attack. But how do you adapt to hope? War Prime, his communication officer spoke carefully. The humans are requesting permission to come aboard. They want to talk. Zexthul's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. In all of Zarathi history, no enemy had ever asked to visit their ships during battle. It went against every rule of warfare he understood. Allow it, he said finally, but maintain full defensive protocols. An hour later, Captain Danny White stepped through the airlock of the Zarathi flagship. He wore his full military uniform, but somehow he still looked like a performer. Behind him came Tony Miller, still dressed in his clown outfit, carrying a small bag that seemed to jingle with every step. The inside of the bioship was unlike anything Danny had ever seen. The walls were alive, pulsing gently with organic rhythms. Lights grew from ceiling tendrils like glowing fruit. The air smelled of ocean and growing things. 2 Zarathi guards led them through corridors that felt more like walking inside a giant sea creature than a spaceship. Finally, they reached the command center, a vast chamber with a living throne made of coral and bone. War Prime Zexthul was larger than Danny had expected. His shell was dark blue-green with silver markings that showed his rank. 4 eyes on. Flexible Stalk studied the humans with intelligence and curiosity. When he spoke, his voice was like waves breaking on a shore. Captain White, Zexthul said in perfect human speech, you have done something remarkable. In 300 years of conquest, no species has ever made my fleet stop to watch. Danny stepped forward, trying not to show his nervousness. War Prime, we stopped your fleet because we wanted to show you something that your bioships can't adapt to. Something that gets stronger when you try to fight it. And what is that? Tony Miller stepped forward, his big shoes squeaking on the living floor. Wonder, sir, curiosity. The desire to see what happens next. Zexthul's eye stalks turned toward the strange human in colorful clothes. You are the tactical advisor I have heard about, the one who teaches the theory of confusion. Actually, sir, I teach the theory of joy. Confusion is just a tool we use to get there. Tony opened his bag and pulled out 3 colorful balls. May I show you something? The Zarathi guards tensed, but Zexthul raised a claw for patience. Proceed. Tony began to juggle. The balls flew in simple patterns at first, then became more complex. He added more balls from his bag until 7 objects spun through the air in impossible formations. But more than the skill, it was Tony's expression that captured attention. He smiled as he juggled, his whole face showing pure happiness. This serves no practical purpose, Zexthul observed. Exactly, Tony replied, never missing a catch. It exists only to bring joy, to make people smile, to show that sometimes the most important things in life are the ones that don't matter at all. One of the juggling balls escaped the pattern and bounced across the floor. A young Zarathi officer picked it up, turning the colorful sphere over in his claws with fascination. Your species fights for territory, for resources, for survival, Danny said. We understand that, but we also fight for something else. We fight for the right to be silly, to create beauty, to tell stories that serve no purpose except to make life more interesting. Zexthul stood from his living throne, his massive form towering over the humans. Your tactical reports say that you defeated our scout ships with carnival equipment. We defeated them with imagination, Danny corrected. Your bioships are perfect at adapting to logical threats, but imagination isn't logical. It's creative, chaotic, wonderful, and completely unpredictable. The War Prime walked to a wall display that showed his fleet scattered throughout the solar system. Human ships still surrounded them, but they weren't in attack formation. They were waiting like an audience at the end of a play. "What happens now?" Zexthul asked. "Do you demand our surrender?" Danny and Tony exchanged glances. This was the moment that would decide everything. "We don't want your surrender," Danny said. "We want your collaboration. We want to teach you what we've learned, and we want to learn from you. Your biotechnology is amazing. Combined with our creativity, imagine what we could build together." Zexthul turned all four eyes on Danny. "You would trust us? After we have conquered 17 of your allied systems?" "Trust has to start somewhere," Danny replied. "Every good story needs a moment when everything changes. This could be that moment." Tony had stopped juggling and now held just one ball. He tossed it gently to the young Zarathi officer who had picked up the dropped ball earlier. The officer caught it awkwardly but smiled in a way that looked strange on Zarathi features. "Your people have been fighting for so long that you've forgotten how to play," Tony said gently. "We'd like to teach you, not as conquerors or subjects, but as friends." Zexthul was quiet for a long time. Around him, his officers waited. Throughout the solar system, 2 fleets hung in space, waiting for his decision. "I have spent my entire life learning how to destroy," he said finally. "Perhaps it is time to learn how to create." The agreement took 3 days to negotiate. The Zarathi would withdraw from occupied systems and begin talks with the Galactic Council. In exchange, humanity would share their entertainment technology and creative techniques. Most importantly, Captain Danny White and the crew of the Jester would travel to Zarathi space to establish the first interspecies circus. Months later, the UES Jester hung in orbit around the Zarathi homeworld. The ship's rainbow hull reflected in the ocean below, where bioships floated peacefully alongside human vessels. In the ship's cargo bay, converted into a performance space, Danny watched as Zarathi younglings learned to juggle alongside human children. Maria taught Zarathi pilots how to fly in artistic patterns instead of just efficient ones. Pete worked with Zarathi communications officers to create music that told stories across different species. Amy designed the first biomechanical carnival rides that grew and changed as people used them. Tony Miller, still wearing his oversized shoes, had become the most popular teacher on the Zarathi homeworld. His classes on applied joy theory were attended by former warriors who were learning that laughter was more powerful than any weapon they had ever used. Admiral Morrison visited for the grand opening of the interspecies circus. As he watched Zarathi and human performers work together, creating impossible beauty in the vast performance space, he realized that humanity had won something far greater than a war. They had won the right to share their greatest gift with the galaxy, the ability to find wonder in chaos, beauty in strangeness, and hope in the most unlikely places. War Prime Zexthul, now calling himself Director Zexthul, stood beside Morrison as the show reached its climax. "Your species has taught us something remarkable," he said in his wave-like voice. "You have shown us that the greatest victories are not won by destroying your enemies, but by turning them into friends." On stage, Danny White took his bow as ringmaster of the greatest show in galactic history. Around him, former enemies performed together, creating art that none of them could have imagined alone. The strangest warship in galactic history had become something even stranger. A bridge between species, proof that sometimes the most powerful weapon of all is an invitation to join the dance.